treatment, MAT. Funding that would be injected into facilities such as the largest network of drug rehab centers in the U.S. Places like, Phoenix House? Now think about that for a second. In 2016, the CDC reported that 50 million Americans live in chronic pain, and 20 million of those patients live in what the CDC defines as high-impact chronic pain. By claiming those tens of millions of people are not pain patients, but instead addicts, and forcing them into medication-assisted treatment, there is going to be a huge influx of business for the substance abuse industry. Kolodny directly benefits from the stigma on chronic pain and long-term opioids. There's no question about it. Considering Kolodny and Prop played such an instrumental role in the 2016 guideline, is it any wonder that the impact was devastating to so many people? Many of Kolodny and Prop's suggestions can actually be found in the 2016 guideline. Now, if Kolodny and Prop had their way, pain management would be a defunct profession. Not only that, the substance abuse industry would grow by leaps and bounds. So now that we know who was behind the creation of the 2016 guideline, in large part, let's dig a little deeper into the substance abuse industry. On November 16, 2013, the New York Times reported, "A relatively high proportion of buprenorphine doctors have troubled records," a Times examination of the federal buprenorphine physician locator found. In West Virginia, one hub of the opioid epidemic, the doctors listed are 5 times as likely to have been disciplined as doctors in general. In Maine, another epicenter, they are 14 times as likely. Nationally, at least 1,350 of the 12,780 buprenorphine doctors have been sanctioned for offenses that include excessive narcotics prescribing, insurance fraud, sexual misconduct, and practicing medicine while impaired. Some have been suspended or even arrested, leaving patients in the lurch. Statistics in the last year show sharp increases in buprenorphine seizures by law enforcement, in reports to poison centers, in emergency room visits for the non-medical use of the drug, and in pediatric hospitalizations for accidental ingestions as small as a lick. Alright, so it seems like there are quite a few Suboxone doctors out there with troubled pasts. And Suboxone is just as prone to abuse and diversion as other opioids, regardless of what Kolodny claims. So it's basically the pot calling the kettle black. The guy's a con man. Having said that, despite a large number of addiction counselors being in recovery themselves, surely substance abuse facilities are safe places for patients in crisis. Well, according to the Orange County Register, on January 19, 2018, the number one complaint involving the rehab industry is sexual misconduct, according to a 2013 investigation by the California State Office of Oversight and Outcomes. The title of the state's probe was Suspect Treatment. State's lack of scrutiny allows unscreened sex offenders and unethical counselors to treat addicts. Allegations of sexual misconduct remain common. Since 2015, state regulators have investigated and closed 78 complaints of alleged sexual misconduct at rehabs, according to the Department of Health Care Services, the state agency that now oversees the recovery industry. The Southern California News Group found that at least 32 sex crimes, including rape and sexual assault, were reported to police in recent years from a sampling of treatment facilities in Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. Additionally, the news group found that nearly 75 statewide complaints of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and inappropriate counselor-client relationships were made to the California agency that regulated addiction treatment centers between 2009 and 2013. This New York Times article was talking about California only. Imagine the true magnitude of the problem when all of the states in the U.S. are factored in. Sexual harassment and sexual assault often goes unreported, especially in populations with a history of substance abuse. So what a perfect storm. Sexual predators in the rehab industry are handed an endless supply of very vulnerable people who are in crisis, most often desperately looking for help, and when harassed, assaulted, or raped, they are statistically less apt to report the abuse. Now, Kolodny and his cronies at Prop want to take tens of millions of chronic pain patients out of pain management and hand us over, rather force us into an industry rife with sexual misconduct, corruption, and criminal behavior. The problems with the substance abuse industry do not stop at sexual misconduct either. According to addictionrep.com on July 13, 2017, the drug rehab industry fraud seems to be everywhere. It has been around for a while, but really gained speed during the Obama administration with the Affordable Care Act. Why is it so prevalent? There are a number of reasons, but the biggest reason is money. The fraud has taken place not only with public insurance like Medicaid, but also the private insurers as well. The private insurers, who can reimburse as much as $30,000 for a 30-day stay in an out-of-network facility, is big bucks. Drug rehabs competing for $30,000 paydays will do a lot of things to make their checks flow freely into their facilities. Florida is frequently called the drug rehab capital of the USA. With this recognition also comes some responsibility. In a recent expose by Megyn Kelly of NBC News, she discussed the plight of families who have lost loved ones to complete dereliction of the system. To make matters worse, there are plenty of rehabs hijacking other rehabs' phone numbers from their Google My Business page and sending the patients down to Florida. The bad news is Google is not able to keep up with this scourge. Another problem is patient brokering, and it is happening all over the country, not just Florida. On October 23, 2018, USA Today explained what patient brokering is and how systemic the problem is in the substance abuse industry. As if people addicted to opioids don't have enough trouble, shady operators have found a way to exploit them. Across the country, these patient brokers troll the streets, drug courts, and anywhere they might find people with addiction problems to lure them to treatment centers and quote-unquote sober living homes, usually illicit ones, in exchange for kickbacks. Internet and TV ads often promote illegitimate facilities and some phone hotlines, while offering to connect callers to legitimate treatment, instead collect referrals for facilities selling them to the highest bidder. The scam is known as patient brokering, with brokers focused on making a buck instead of matching sick people with appropriate treatment. So there you have it. These are the actions of the people in an industry that was instrumental in the creation of the 2016 CDC Guideline for prescribing opioids for chronic pain. The CDC only consulted a handful of chronic pain specialists and instead relied heavily on the recommendations of people in an industry that is plagued by unethical, immoral, and even criminal behavior. I hope listeners are starting to see why the CDC Guideline was so misinformed, misguided, and destructive to the chronic pain community. We know how damaging it was. I'm covering this to show why the 2016 Guideline really hurt the chronic pain community. There is good news from all this harm to our community for Kolodny and his ilk. Now, millions of abandoned pain patients can be relabeled as addicts and find themselves living at Phoenix House and similar facilities. Before we move on and discuss whether or not the damage from the 2016 CDC Guideline can be undone, I'm going to read a petition to the Department of Justice and the Food and Drug Administration. It can be found on change.org. The petition is also linked to in the transcript of this podcast. The petition I signed reads, Dr. Andrew Kolodny, the co-founder of PROP, should immediately disclose of any and all financial earnings from the manufacturer of Suboxone and Subutex. This includes any and all financial earnings or gain from Reckitt Benckiser and any investor companies. Any and all financial gains from these companies to Kolodny, be it stocks or money for representation or promotion of either drug, will represent a severe conflict of interest on the part of Kolodny. It will prove he had ulterior motives for promoting Suboxone as an alternative for pain patients. This will show motive for Kolodny advocating against people who suffer from chronic pain and his objecting to physicians treating people in chronic pain with conventional opioid pain medication. Kolodny has demanded that anyone with any tie to pharmaceutical companies should not be allowed to advocate for people in chronic pain. This same principle should apply to Kolodny and anyone else on the board of PROP. Any ties to manufacturers or distributors of Suboxone and Subutex should serve as a conflict of interest and disqualify them from advocating against pain patients and the physicians who treat pain, chronic or acute. Kolodny should not be allowed to suggest pain patients be switched to Suboxone or Subutex. This disclosure of information should happen immediately. Okay, so that concludes my look into the experts behind the 2016 guideline. Is it any wonder that the guideline is completely inept from a pain management standpoint, and instead its sole focus is on getting patients off of opioids through the use of medication-assisted treatment? In episode 2 of the Chronic Pain Survival Guide, America the Overprescribed, I discussed that I am not a fanboy of opioids, and there are in fact many patients who either do not need to be taking opioids or at least as many opioids as they do. Having said that, yoga and acupuncture are not standalone replacements for long-term opioid therapy. Instead, alternative modalities like diet, exercise, and other alternative treatments should be a part of a multifaceted approach to pain management. There are chronic pain patients out there who require opioids to prevent daily suffering. As with yoga and acupuncture and other alternatives, opioids are also not a standalone solution either. Though I am not an opioid cheerleader, I understand that this assault on pain medicine is really an attack on the patients. We discussed opioid manufacturing APQs earlier. Despite massive cuts to opioid manufacturing that began before the 2016 guideline was released, opioid overdoses continue to soar. Politicians like former Attorney General Jeff Sessions or Governor Chris Christie and agencies like the DEA and CDC continue to blame doctors, pharmacists, and Big Pharma for the opioid epidemic. The truth of the matter is cuts in opioid manufacturing have not impacted the number of opioid overdoses because people are not overdosing on pain meds. Groups like PROP and scumbags like Kolodny claim that opioids are not effective for the treatment of chronic pain, and they have been beating that drum for a really long time. On July 25, 2012, PROP petitioned the FDA over opioids and chronic pain. The petition read in part, "At present, the FDA-approved indication for nearly all instant-release opioid analgesics is moderate to severe pain. For extended-release opioids, the indication is for moderate to severe pain when a continuous, around-the-clock analgesic is needed for an extended period of time. These overly broad indications imply a determination by the FDA that they are safe and effective for long-term use. As outlined below, an increasing body of medical literature suggests that long-term use of opioids may neither be safe nor effective for many patients, especially when prescribed in high doses. Unfortunately, many clinicians are under the false impression that chronic opioid therapy is an evidence-based treatment for chronic non-cancer pain, and that dose-related toxicities can be avoided by slow upward titration. These misconceptions lead to overprescribing and high-dose prescribing. By implementing the label changes proposed in this petition, FDA has an opportunity to reduce harm caused to chronic pain patients as well as societal harm caused by the diversion of prescribed opioids. In addition, FDA will be able to reinforce adherence to dosing limits that have been recommended by the United States Centers for Disease Control, the state of Washington, and the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act established that a drug intended to treat a condition must be proven safe and effective for use as labeled. The current label on opioid analgesics does not comply with this law. By taking the actions requested in this petition, FDA will be able to exercise its regulatory responsibility over opioid manufacturers by prohibiting the market of opioids for conditions in which their use has not been proven safe and effective. Specific actions requested for changes to opioid analgesic labels. Number 1, strike the term moderate from the indication for non-cancer pain. Number 2, add a maximum daily dose, equivalent to 100 milligrams of morphine for non-cancer pain. Number 3, add a maximum duration of 90 days for continuous daily use for non-cancer pain. A maximum duration of 3 months, and if you're in chronic pain after that, I guess you're just screwed. You know, I asked earlier, who would benefit from claiming opioids are not effective for chronic pain? The simplest answer is typically the right answer, and it is definitely that way in this situation. By tapering countless patients off of opioids, many of those patients will go into crisis, or worse, find opioids on the streets. Regardless, a ton of them will find themselves occupying a bed in Colony's Phoenix House or other similar facilities. I mean, it's just sad, folks. But as we often discover when we dig deeply into the reason behind nefarious agendas, money is typically the answer. Each new admit to a rehab clinic has the potential of a $30,000 payday. Drugs used in medication-assisted treatment like Suboxone